So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar this afternoon. I'm Hannah Vickers. I'm the Chief Executive of the Association for Consultancy and Engineering. And whether you're one of our members or whether you're one of the members of the various organisations across the industry, you're most welcome. So this webinar is for everybody who is interested in our topic today. This is actually the final instalment of our webinar series, all about navigating COVID-19. And we created this series to help our members and to help the wider industry navigate some of the unusual challenges, shall we say, that we are facing at the moment. So already in the series, we've covered specific webinars on support for SMEs. We've covered the coronavirus job retention scheme, procurement, and how that has been adapted and flexed during this period. And this is the last in our first series of this round of webinars. So, but do look out, because we think, backed by popular demand, we are going to commission a second series with another round of experts starting after Easter. And that's going to look next week at the business loans and the government support on offer there. And also it's going to start to pick up how we can plan for recovery with our businesses. So that's something to look forward to if you like today and if you've enjoyed our webinar so far. But that's all in the future. So back to today's episode, a really interesting set of panelists I've got for you today. So in today's episode, we're going to be focusing on communicating in a crisis. So this picks up some of the comms issues, some of the things that perhaps you should be focusing on when you're sort of thinking about your comms strategy. So we've got three guests today. So we've got Harriett Hindmarsh, who is Corporate Vice President and Global Marketing and Communications at AECOM. So she's going to share a bit of detail around how AECOM have approached their comms, so a bit of a case study for us, and how they're dealing with audiences. And you can imagine there's quite a lot of audiences when you're the size of AECOM. Then we'll be looking at the challenges for construction in the media. So we've got Andy Walker, who is the editor of Infrastructure Intelligence, to talk to us about how we can be engaging and working with the media during this time. And then I've also got joining us today Sara Lipscombe from Costain. So she's going to be contributing on how Costain have approached this. And all three of our panelists are going to be taking your questions and answers at the end of this session. So if I can just give you a little bit of housekeeping, I'm hoping that a number of you will be return listeners in my strange alternative career that I've seemed to have acquired as a radio presenter. But for those of you who aren't, there's a few sort of housekeeping pieces of advice here. So you will get the best experience if you're listening through headphones. I would say even better if you're listening through headphones in your garden in the sunshine. I don't know if that's an option, but it's probably very attractive this afternoon. And then when we come to the questions and the Q&A towards the end of the session, so we're going to allow a sort of decent amount of time for questions, you'll see in the right-hand side of your screen, there will be a questions panel. So please do type your questions in as we go through. You can type them at any point. You don't have to wait for the Q&A. They all just get stored up such that when we come to the Q&A, I can then ask those. So please do keep them coming in and don't worry about the point at which, because we do collect them all up. A final point is that we are going to be recording this, not that any of my panelists will swear, but just to remind everybody, and equally say that you can refer back to it or you can share with your colleagues. So again, it will be free for everybody on our website for those who may want to use this as a resource going forward. So I think on that basis, we should get started. So I'd like to welcome our first panelist, Harriett Hindmarsh, who's going to talk us through AECOM's approach. Harriett, over to you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, good. Okay, thank you for asking me to join. I'm delighted to be here today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, if we go on to my first slide, a little bit about what we've been doing over the last couple of months at AECOM. We go on to the first slide. So I work in EMEA. My job, I have two parts to my job. I'm responsible for marketing and communications across EMEA, and then I'm also responsible for leading marketing across the enterprise. So I have a foot in both in the operations and corporate, and I'm spread quite widely, as you can imagine. So if we go on to the next slide, please. So I just wanted to put this up. I mean, most of you will be familiar with this map, but the scale of the crisis and the pandemic as it is today, and it's deepening every day, as we know. We first obviously became aware of it because of our Asia business, and our Asia business was impacted severely. There were lockdowns in Asia. We saw that then move towards Europe. Our Italian business have been working at home for 6 weeks. Our Spanish business for 4 weeks. We've all, as we know in the UK, been working home for 2.5 weeks. Our offices in the Americas as well have been working at home for the last 2 weeks, and we don't see any change in this. So it is something we are monitoring. We have seen now with Asia that as the situation has improved there, that they are starting to look at a return to work, and we are now working with them to record what this means and best practice, so that we can apply it to the rest of the business as we move forward, both in terms of business continuity and communications, and dealing with our staff as they start to come back into the workplace. If we go to the next slide, please. So this next slide, so it isn't just about the health and safety of our people, we know that, but it's also that the coronavirus has had a major impact on our economies. And we've all, everybody on this call, I imagine, has felt this over the last weeks and months. I think the graphs there need no explanation. We've seen the values of the stock markets fall significantly, and this has had an impact on our clients, on our people, on where we work, on our outlook. I know our business strategies we've all had to relook at those, and we've spent a lot of time looking at how we can survive in this. And this has also led us to think about, what does the future look like as we've adapted to the new normal, as the markets start to change, as our clients look at working differently. What will the new normal look when we recover? So going on to the next slide. This is a stakeholder map. I think you'll all be familiar with that. So I've broken it down into the internal, the external stakeholders that we work with in AECOM. So obviously internally, staff, it is our staff, but it's the various members of staff that we deal with. So from our leaders, our line managers, our project managers who are dealing directly with clients, vulnerable staff, and particularly when it comes to the coronavirus, there were a number of staff that we needed to treat in a particular way and look after carefully. There's our support services. We were talking just before we went live about the fabulous role that IT has played in this. Our HR teams, we know, have been working around the clock, as have our communications teams. We know, for instance, that I was on a call about this earlier. We have staff who are working remotely, who can't leave the countries that they're in due to travel restrictions, and they're stuck on their own. So there's a lot of work gone into how we support all these groups of staff internally. Externally, then we have obviously our clients. Our clients are really important, and they have reached out to us in many instances to ask us to help them work their way through this crisis. And look at new ways of working, and we've done things like created a virtual public consultation tool, working with particular clients. We've got our partners in the supply chain. What does this mean with them? We have landlords in our buildings. There's local and national government, and I know from working with the ACE, we've been engaging with national governments, the UK government here, about what this means, how we can support government, but also how they can support us as an organisation, as an industry. There's recruits, there's graduates, our CSR partners obviously are impacted. So we've had to pivot our approach to CSR and look at how we might support with a specific focus on this time and the coronavirus. Next slide, please. So if we bring it back to communications, the challenge was, how do we look at the problem that we're facing, and how do we define it, and how do we create a focus for everything that we're trying to do? So we quickly came up with these three circles. And the focus of our organisation was to preserve jobs, protect our people and support our clients. And that's a tenet we've used across all our communications as we've gone forward, internally and externally, to help us deal with the challenges that we've been facing. We know that the economic environment has made business difficult. We know that our people are at risk from the coronavirus. Their families are at risk. They're very worried, and this new way of working has also put a number of challenges. Not everyone's been able to deal with it in the same way. So it's how do we support our people in a better way, and then supporting our clients. How are we going to work with our clients in this new way of working? How are we going to support them? How are their needs going to change? How do we progress through this together? Next slide, please. This slide I thought was worth putting up because of some of the issues that I was talking about. It's a wellness wheel. We quickly came to realize we were creating lots of communications. For instance, in our UK and Ireland business, we do a daily communication to staff. And initially it was about, these are how you can work at home, this is how you access IT. Now it's very much about, sharing good news stories. Here's how we've helped a client, here's how this team are helping each other. And also then supporting them with wellness. And it's, giving them tips on how they can support each other, how they can, if they're struggling at home, finding it difficult, how they can connect with each other, giving them tools to support in terms of someone they might want to talk to if they are struggling mentally and emotionally. Tips on where you can, how you can do exercise at home to keep fit. Of particular concern are some of our employees who are there on their own in apartments with no family. And with social distancing, they feel very isolated. Again, those staff members who are working remotely in countries and they might be stuck in a hotel room and quite restricted. How do we help people feel that they haven't been abandoned, that we are there for them, and that that AECOM is a company that cares, and we will help them get through this. To the next slide, please. So these are the next couple of slides are some examples of what we have done. We have video is everything in AECOM at the minute. So I have spent the morning on video conferencing. One of my friends was saying she doesn't shower every second day because she doesn't have to see anybody. I was like, I have to get up and get dressed. Not quite in office gear, but because I'm constantly on video conferencing, which is a great way of keeping in touch, actually. And I must admit that I'm enjoying the video conferencing. It took a little bit of getting used to, but it's really, people have really started to connect over it. And I was talking to one of my colleagues in LA last night, and we connect every day for 30 minutes. There's a group of us from around the world. We didn't do that before, certainly not by video conference. So it's we're actually building stronger relationships. And this picture here is our EMEA leadership team. So in the upper right-hand corner, that's Lara Poloni. She's our chief executive in EMEA. She's a very inspiring leader. And she brings her team together at least once a week. We've had exec meetings for whole days on video conferencing, and it's a really good way to keep the business going, and we share concerns, and we are supporting each other through the other elements of what's going on. Next, please. I think this next slide is it's an example of how we've changed our communications. And I think Sara, who's also on the call, would say we've had to pivot how we structure our communications and how we communicate with our staff. This is a communication that went out this week from David Barwell, who's chief executive of our UK and Ireland business. We use something called Microsoft Teams, which is where we do our video conferencing. But it also allows you to record videos of yourself at home. So he recorded this, as you can tell, in his house, and we embedded it in a note to all staff to bring them up to how we're progressing at the minute, how we're dealing with the conversations we're having with government, what the next stages are, how they can get in contact with us to get more information. And we did this with our chief executive of the Middle East and Africa and our leader in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia as well. And it's gone down really well. They're very homemade, but people are responding to it because everybody feels like they're in the same boat. We're all in it together. And it's quite important that everyone feels everybody is impacted. Next, please. The next slide, I think, is a bit of a lighter tone. So these are members of my team who have opened up what they're calling the staying in, and they have team socials, I think, at least twice a week, and they have pub quizzes. And again, this is stuff that they didn't do previously. I mean, they always used to go to the pub and whatnot every so often, but this is a regular thing. And I think there's a lot of recognition that some of the people in the team are on their own and they need that connection. So we're using our communications tool to keep each other together, really, and on the straight and narrow, I suppose. Next, please. Then this is the CSR. So we've started to work with our CSR partners differently and looking at how we can help them in the current environment. We've done a lot of work in continental Europe, and we've been working with clients who have donated masks. We have people who are making masks, and we're also looking at our CSR funding and how we can divert it to charities and works that can help our local communities more. And that's something that we're really keen on. But a really big part of our CSR, as we thought about it, is our biggest priority at the minute is our people. So our people are our first duty when it comes to CSR, and then it's working with the communities around us and those that are impacted in our communities. So we've allowed us to take a different view as well to our CSR, and that's been quite interesting. If we move on then, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we have been working with clients. So as this happened, we were getting approaches from many of our clients globally about how we might support them as we went through this crisis and the pandemic. One of the things we decided to do was develop a hub on our website, which would host some of the material about the services that we can provide in times of crisis. So we have a disaster resilience team who's based in the US, but they've done a lot of work. They did a lot of work during Ebola. They've done a lot of work in global pandemics, and they have developed skills and services that we can take and apply globally. This tool as well was really good for putting this information in a place where all our people could access it. Because as you can imagine, in a company the size of AECOM, not everybody knows what everybody does. We always say if we knew what we knew, we would be really, really powerful. And it's trying to share that information. So this also served as a hub for our people to learn about the skills and support that we could provide our clients, and to use that information then to go out to their clients and help to educate them. We are developing new services all the time, and we're developing pieces on that which we host on this. So this is a very dynamic site, and it's updated on nearly a daily basis. Then the next part is, and we as an organization thought there were different ways of looking at how we support our clients, and we didn't want to stop engaging with our clients and sharing best practice and having conversations with them that lead to innovation. So we have a space, for those of you who know AECOM in London, we have a space which is a really nice space on the 16th floor in Aldgate Tower, which we regularly host about 5 events a week. Now, obviously, we can't do that. So we've started to host our events online. This is one of the first ones that we hosted. It was about how circular is your building. And it was originally meant to be a breakfast seminar, but we configured it to a virtual format. And we had a really good response to this. And we had all our panelists really enjoyed it. It's something we're doing more and more. So as well as providing, virtual consultation toolkits, we are still doing this, sharing best practice, discussing how we can move forward as an organization with our clients. And then the final piece that I think is on the next slide. We are aware that, this crisis is ongoing. And we had a conversation about this before the call went live about how life may not go back to the way it was. And let's let's hope in many ways that we take some valuable lessons from what we've learned during this crisis. There's going to be a recovery phase. We're going to have to look at how our infrastructure is set up to deal with the new normal and the new phases. So what does that mean? We've been doing a lot of work with governments across the world, talking to them about, so what do you think should happen when we come out of the crisis? How should we all work together to support the recovery post this crisis? What will the future of infrastructure look like? So we publish something called the Future of Infrastructure Report every year. This will be our 3rd year. So what we've done with it is we have brought the publication of this forward a little bit, but also created a sub-campaign called The Future Is Now. And it's looking at, okay, so this is the future. How are we going to support each other to come out of it as clients, as governments, as users of infrastructure? What do we need to do, and what should infrastructure look like as we go forward? So that's very much a partnership with our clients, as I said, with the local and national governments that we deal with. And that this piece is being updated all the time. So it's more of a future focused piece, where the other piece is more about, how we can support in the immediate and short term. So that's it from me. I think I'm at the end of my slides. Happy to take any questions when we get to the appropriate time, and I hope you found that useful.
Thank you very much, Harriett. I certainly found that very interesting. So I mean, takeaways from that for me were that, it's all about contact. You really showcased to us there the different ways and the different forums and how you've had to adapt that contact with your staff and also with your clients. So, again, just perhaps if that's your objective, actually almost pivoting how you do that, I think is really important, because it's very easy. I could see, during this prolonged period, it would be very easy to become quite isolated. And then secondly, that point on future thinking, perhaps some of us do have a little bit more time, or maybe we will do, over the next few weeks or on our evenings when we're not sadly going to the pub anymore. That sort of time to reflect and ponder on the future as well, I think is quite a valuable takeaway, actually. So thank you very much for sharing that.
Very well.
I'm going to move us on now to speak to Andy Walker. So a different perspective from Andy as our editor of Infrastructure Intelligence. Needs no introduction really, Infrastructure Intelligence, but it is our, one of our industry publications. It's all, written for the industry, by the industry, and Andy is at the helm. So Andy, you're going to speak to us about the media and how we can use that as a sort of communication tool over these sort of next few weeks and few months.
Thanks, Hannah, and good afternoon, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, that's great. If we can just click on to the first slide, please, Chetna. I think, and the next one as well, people have made the point when it comes to the COVID-19 outbreak that, these are completely unprecedented times, and I don't think anybody has ever experienced anything like it. So, let's get the hyperbole out the way straight away. And I think nowhere is that more the case than within the media as well, because as someone who works in the media and who's got friends in the media, and I'm sure that Harriett and Sarah have as well, we tend to be a bit of a sort of a hard bitten bunch in terms of when you get massive news stories. For a lot of journalists, it's kind of what they live for. And while that is the case, one of the things that I've certainly noticed around the current climate is that people are just, completely, in some cases, discombobulated by what's happened. And I think that's obviously the case in some areas. With construction companies, everyone is in the same boat at the present time, and some will definitely fare better than others. And I think it was interesting looking at the organized way that AECOM, through Harriett's presentation that we've just seen, has actually really looked at how it organizes its communications, because planning is absolutely crucial in any situation. And I think in the current situation that we're actually in, even though, you know, in some cases you are, I suppose, operating on the seat of your pants in some cases, because we're all working in an environment that we've never had to work in before. Of course, some people have worked from home, you know, more than others, but now we're in a situation where everyone is in that same boat, if you like, and therefore, you know, there are some challenges there. I think it's important to understand that, and it's important to understand, you know, where we are at the present time, because sometimes it's easy just to think that it is a normal situation and the only thing is working from home. It's obviously far from that, and I think the media is in the same boat as well. You've only had to have looked at news bulletins on the television or listened to the radio to know that the media is operating in a different way than it actually has in the past. You know, we're seeing a lot more almost DIY videos of people actually being on the screen when they're reporting, because obviously everybody is locked down. You know, even government press conferences are taking place, you know, on screen. So, you know, and that actually has, you know, that actually has some issues in terms of the way in which the media works as well. And I think it's sometimes quite apposite to, you know, to get your head around that, because that can actually help you when you're looking to intervene in the media, which, notwithstanding the very difficult and unprecedented times that we find ourselves in, there are, and I hesitate to use this word, but I can't think of a better way to use it, there are media opportunities to be had, especially for an industry like the construction sector, which is so crucial to how society operates. And the media are interested in that, not just the specialist media either, but also the national media as well. Next slide, please. Obviously, whenever you're looking to try and get media coverage, it's always worthwhile having a weather eye on the news cycle. Obviously, we're in a very strange news cycle at the moment, and I just put something up there that basically was on the live feed of The Guardian yesterday. Again, not the sort of news you want to be reading about, really. Global trade forecast to fall by up to a third. And then just almost as an afterthought, the world is on track for a new Great Depression, says the World Trade Organization. Now, obviously, these are serious issues. And when the media is preoccupied with looking at those issues and looking at the wider question of where the pandemic is actually going, you might think, well, it's really going to be difficult, you know, to get coverage. And while that's the case up to a point, I think it's important to realize that it's not impossible to get coverage at the present time. It might seem like everything is about coronavirus, and indeed in many cases it actually is. But also I think it's important to make the point that the media is open to the industry, and there are outlets that we wouldn't normally have access to that frankly are very much open to the industry at the present time. And again, it's like anything else, it's always worth listening to some of the programs that are taking place, whether it be on the radio or on the television. Obviously in the television, in the case of the television, watching it. But there are all sorts of stuff that's out there at the minute where the media is actually looking for news that isn't just directly related to coronavirus, but also they're looking for a different angle on coronavirus as well. And I was struck by the points that Harriett made in her contribution when she's talked about some of the CSR activity that was taking place, where AECOM was supporting some of their long-standing you know, partners in different areas of the world. And I think that's very much the kind of news that the industry is looking to highlight at the present time. It's certainly from a construction trade press point of view, the kind of news that I'm interested in as well. We'll obviously, we are receiving hundreds of press releases every day still. So, the industry is, from a comms point of view, pushing out a certain amount of output. But also, one of the things, or some of the things that I'm really interested in at the minute is some of those people-led reports and features that actually show how the industry is making a difference on the ground. And I think it's also the case that the national media as well is really interested in that stuff. If you take, let's take BBC Radio 5 Live as an example. Historically, that's obviously been a news network, but also sport. Well, clearly there's no sport at the minute. So literally, it's all news more than it ever has before. And I've heard some really interesting conversations and discussions that have taken place through. I'm not even going to say on the morning, but it's actually throughout the day now. Where they've basically been reporting on how different sectors have actually been addressing dealing with the COVID-19 outbreak. And I think our industry especially has actually got a whole raft of experts and people within firms, whether that be on HR issues, business issues, the whole issue around government grants. There's been a lot of conversation about that on the media, whether it be the use of technology and working from home. There are real opportunities there to actually intervene in those programs. And often, apart from just obviously using some of the contacts that you might have on some of those programs, even just sending a text to them, they'll get back to you. And if you've got something, if you can, think of a way of framing a particular story, like the one that Harriett mentioned in relation to the provision of masks to, to care homes and so on, then there's absolutely no doubt, I think, that some of those outlets would be, would be interested in that. Equally with phone-ins as well, of offering experts to speak on those is an opportunity, I think, for the industry to actually, to maybe talk about things in a different way that it wouldn't do in the past. And the other thing that's just started on Channel 4, which I think is a useful avenue for media coverage as well, is the new Steph McGovern show. Steph, of course, is an engineer by training. She used to be on the BBC, but now she has this kind of news and entertainment type thing. But that's just started, and she's had some interesting stuff on there as well. And I think it's definitely worth tapping her up. The other thing that I would encourage people to do as well is to reach out to the industry's coronavirus task force, because they've actually got a raft of what they call good news stories around the current situation. And I think it's certainly worthwhile touching base with them, and ACE can give you the contacts for that, because I know that they're interested in highlighting some of the good news stuff, as we are on infrastructure intelligence as well. Next slide, please. I think on a wider point, and Sarah made the point when she spoke earlier on, or I think it might have been off air, when she talked about building sites. Obviously, the industry, as a high-profile industry, is very much in the public headlines at the minute, and there's obviously been some discussion in relation to building sites and whether they should remain open or closed. And I know that the industry itself, through its work on the coronavirus task force and elsewhere, has been very diligent in ensuring that the best advice has been sent out to to contractors and other building companies in relation to building sites. I think it's fair to say there's been a little bit of misinformation, and I think I would say unfair criticism of some building companies for keeping building sites actually open, and maybe the message didn't properly get across in relation to the fact that there are a lot of sites that need to stay open for either safety reasons or because they're dealing with essential work. And I think there is an opportunity to speak up for the industry, you know, on these issues. As I say, there's emergency work that needs to continue. We'll all be aware of the COVID-19 emergency construction, the hospitals that have been created, and obviously we hope that they won't be needed to the extent that they'll ever be needed. But nevertheless, it's been the construction industry that's actually been to the fore in ensuring that those you know, that those facilities are built in very, very short order. You know, one of the reasons, again, another, I suppose it's a good news story as well, but we don't necessarily see enough of it. One of the reasons why the supermarkets, which seem to be the only growth industry at the moment out of this whole crisis, one of the reasons, perhaps a key reason why they're able to keep running, is because we have a transport infrastructure that is actually still enabling the delivery, whether by road or rail. You know, there might not be any passenger rail travel taking place at the present time, but there's certainly a lot of freight travel going on, and that's actually keeping the country running. And I think we need to get that across, I believe, from a construction point of view, to show that actually this industry, you know, is actually helping to keep the country running. Obviously, you have to be careful about how you get that across, but particularly where firms are involved in that kind of work, whether it be logistic work, whether it be direct transport work, whether it be construction work, I think it's entirely legitimate to talk about how that actually works when you're working in a you know, in a lockdown situation. And obviously, looking further ahead, there's no question that the construction sector will be a potential economic driver, even more than it ever has been, when we start to come out of the crisis as well. And I think, you know, I think it's entirely right and proper that we start to make those points as an industry to the media as well as we move forward. Next slide, please. The other thing I think it's really important at a time like this is to keep in touch with key journalists. As I said earlier, we're still at Infrastructure Intelligence receiving hundreds of press releases at the present time. But don't just send your press releases. Think about those story ideas and pitch those directly to journalists. And because journalists at the moment, like everybody else, are working in a different way, are working at home, they're also using much more things like Zoom. And I'll say a little bit more about Zoom in a minute, because I think it's actually quite interesting from a media point of view. But you might have an opportunity there to actually have a direct conversation with journalists, where maybe in the past, you know, they've been too busy to actually, you know, give you the time of day. And certainly I've found that when people have reached out to me, either by video conferencing or phone or whatever, that you know, at this present time, and not just relied on sending emails out, then I've been much more amenable to talk to them about what stories that they've you know, that they've actually got. So I think in terms of the communications, I know it's difficult because firms have got all sorts of other things that they've got to do, and as Harriett mentioned earlier on, you know, from a comms professional point of view, you've got to get involved in HR and all the rest of it. But nevertheless, I think those contacts with journalists are absolutely crucial at the present time, and actually will stand you in good stead, you know, for the future. I mentioned earlier about the good news stories. They're absolutely critical, and I think most firms will have good news stories, whether it's directly some of the stuff that they're doing to assist the local effort around coronavirus, but also even some of those points again that Harriett flagged up, you know, these virtual social get-togethers for firms and things like that. The media are interested in, I suppose, the communication of communication, and I think we shouldn't forget that. Equally, other programs that are worth looking at the minute, from the point of view of how we're actually communicating with the media, is those shows that actually talk about the media. So the Radio 4 media show, for example, is really interested, and people who have an interest in how the media are actually reporting stuff, I'd urge you to listen to the last you know, few episodes of that, because they're really going into a bit of a deep dive really in relation to how you know, the media sector is working through this this current current crisis. But don't forget as well that journalists are in the same boat as we all are. You know, we're working in our home offices. We're all working, you know, using Zooms, using other technology, and therefore you're on the same level really. And you shouldn't forget that in terms of how we communicate going forward. Next slide, please. I think the other thing that struck me, and I've mentioned it a couple of times, and Harriett mentioned it as well, is this crisis has brought digital onto, it literally has put it center stage. And it almost, I mean, obviously this seminar is a bit weird. Well, not weird, but it's obviously an audio webinar. I've been doing quite a lot of, as I'm sure everybody else has, Zoom conferences and other video conferences. And so it feels a bit strange just to have an audio one for once and not seeing people. But I think this is something that there is a kernel here in what's happening at the minute, which will help to change the industry in the future. And I think digital, the big thing for me about digital, and it's always been the case, is used properly. It's a big democratizer really of communication. And I think we're seeing that at the moment during the course of this crisis. I mentioned earlier on in relation to television programs. I mean, when you've got leading correspondents on the national news who are actually basically doing a video conference when they're doing their reports, or being interviewed by the newsreader, basically online, you can see how things are actually changing. And I think what we will see in the future, we know sometimes some of the some of the technology can be sometimes a little bit flaky, but I've been really impressed with how good the technology has been when you consider that everybody is actually using it at the present time. So I think people need to think about that when they're looking at how they communicate with the media as well, because I think I know from my own point of view, and I know from speaking to people that I know who work in the national media, that they're really keen to get people on camera so that they, basically, because obviously it's much more visual, when you're talking about the television. And I think given the fact that we're all using it at the moment, then, there's a real opportunity there. It still doesn't negate the fact that you have to have the right things to say, you need to get your message right and all the rest of it. But actually, I think, there is a real opportunity there to engage with, not just the trade media, but also the national media, where you have a story that's actually worth talking about. And remember as well that, things like Zoom and video conferencing, it doesn't have to look perfect. You'll see from some of the stuff that you've seen on the national television that, some of the people have been interviewed, sometimes very, very important people with an important message. It doesn't look that great, but I think in the current climate, the message is everything. And I think it's worthwhile getting that, out there as well. Social media also is extremely important. The media are currently, as they often do, but even more so at the moment, are scanning social media to ensure that they can pick up stories as well. So it's well worth thinking about that from the point of view of your comms and your communications with the media. So a lot of opportunity, I think, around using digital and using your on your stories. And just kind of summing up, I think we're obviously still too far away from the end of the current crisis, really. But I think it's important to recognise, and Harriett touched on it when she spoke, in relation to this will end and it will mean change. And people say we hope it will mean change to the world of work, and especially to our industry. And I think, that's important as well. I think we need to all think about what that might mean going forward. And I hope that it will lead to a different way of working. I hope it'll lead to a more accessible industry. It'll certainly, when you have, leading CEOs, as we saw on the previous presentation, broadcasting directly into people's homes, that's got to change the dynamic of the way in which people work. But the other thing, I think, from a comms point of view, and from getting the construction sector's views out into the media, is there's absolutely no doubt that infrastructure is going to be crucial to the recovery of the nation when it actually comes. I mean, I know it's probably seems like a long time ago now, but just before this outbreak started, the government announced a massive investment in infrastructure, which was starting to lead to an upsurge in the industry. Now, obviously, the coronavirus outbreak put paid to that, but that's going to come back. That is definitely going to come back. I'm not saying it's going to be in a straight line, because the other thing we need to be aware of, and I think this is one that the industry will have to pick up, and I'm sure the media will, but what happens when some of these projects start getting finished, bearing in mind that these are projects that are going to be completed at a time potentially of significant recession? Are those projects going to open up? Will some of them have to be mothballed? What will be the situation there? Now, I don't mean to be doom and gloom on that, but that's something that needs to be borne in mind. And perhaps it needs to be borne in mind in order to give the government a really big nudge to say, look, it's more important than ever that we have an industry that's actually going to not just pump prime the economy, but, as I said in an earlier slide, potentially be the savior of the economy going forward, because they've already promised that funding for infrastructure, and we're all aware of the significant projects and the large projects, but also it's the smaller projects in every town and city that will be crucial to actually improving the economy across the country, really. And I think we need to be really focused on how we highlight that going forward. Obviously, the industry will do things in the right way. It won't move too quickly, but I think at the same time, there is an opportunity here to nudge the government to say that they need to make sure that this investment that has been promised in the past does come on stream, so that we do actually come out of this in the best possible way. Yes, it'll be different. I think there's no question about that. And I think, every industry and every sector is going to be doing things differently in the future. But I'd like to think that, knowing what I know about the construction sector and the people within it, that we have a real opportunity to actually not just do things differently, but actually to do things that will show this industry at its best going forward. And I hope and I expect that that will be the case as we move out of this crisis.
Thank you very much, Andy. That was very uplifting, and I think it was an inspiring few minutes there to finish. Now I think that's it, and it's great that we have people such as yourself who are there to help us amplify that message. Actually, so I think that was very, very well said. Right, so I'm just going to bring Sarah in to sort of reflect on those two presentations just for a couple of minutes, and then we've got a few questions as well. So, so Sarah, just in your role at Costain, how did that sort of chime with what you've been working on? Oh, check you're still there, Sarah. Okay, I think we might have a slight technical problem with Sarah. We can't hear her. Right, okay, so I think we'll pause that, we'll go to questions. So the first question I have, Harriett, I'm going to put your way because it's something that you mentioned, and I know that is close to a lot of the work that you're doing at AECOM, but it's in relation to public consultation. So the question is, how do you see the role of and approaches to public consultation changing in the crisis and actually in the world after? So I know you've been looking at this directly in AECOM. I don't know if you want to just share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, sorry, I missed that. I missed a little bit of that question, technical difficulties, about public consultation.
Yes, so how do you see the role of and approaches to public consultation changing? So I know that you've been thinking about how you can adapt the process and what you can do, perhaps remotely. So I don't know if you've got some thoughts on that you could share.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. And we've been having a lot of conversation about this week about, how do we even further evolve our virtual consultation tool? Because we've had so much interest in it from the industry. And I think what it does, actually, I mean, if I go back to what I was saying earlier about the future of infrastructure, last year when we published our future of infrastructure report, we interviewed 1,000 citizens in 10 cities across the world. So 1,000 users of infrastructure in each city. And we asked them how they would like government to better plan infrastructure. And one of the first things that they said, and it was nearly top of the list in all the cities, was we want to be consulted more. And as well as that, we want the consultation to matter. And I do think there's a growing rise in the importance of, or I think a lot of people are understanding more about, we need to engage with our communities more. They have more of a role to play in the success of our infrastructure, the use of our infrastructure, the development of our communities as we go forward. So we need to find a better way of engaging with them. And I think these virtual tools are a way to do that. Now, not everybody has access to the technology, but I do think it does provide us with a good way to expand the consultation process and look at consultation in a wider and more inclusive way.
Okay, no, thank you. And I think there have been all sorts of interesting things starting to emerge as well about being able to do, if you need to, being able to do public consultation online, virtual consultation rooms. And as you say, perhaps in the future that's part of a wider strategy. But I think there is a really important role, as you say, for sort of thinking about how we can still reach out to those communities if we are, perhaps going to have these periods of lockdown for maybe the next year and a half.
Yeah, and even above that, just reaching people we might not have met, have reached before, but using this as a lever to do that and think about that.
Absolutely. So hopefully some positive things, some positive learnings coming out of this. Okay, so right, I've got another question I'd say for Harriett and hopefully for Sarah. Bless her if she's with us. So this one is around communicating with your customers. So somebody has asked, our customers are in different positions. Some of them are actually at risk of losing their businesses. And they're saying, is it wise to communicate how we can help customers to prepare and facilitate their recovery when we've got people in very different situations? What's your advice in that space? And if we can go to Sarah first on that.
Yes, let me try again. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now, loud and clear.
Fantastic. Not sure what went wrong there. I think for us, when we started this, we set ourselves a North Star really, which is something that guides everything that we do. And that was really simply to do the right thing by society, our people and our clients. And I think it's about leaning into our clients. And it's if you know your clients very well and you have a good relationship with them, then you're not trying to sell them ideas and products that aren't going to land. So if you've got a client that has a particular challenge, it's showing that you understand their business and showing that you're sensitive to that and actually adjusting your services to that. So I think a lot of it, with communications, it's all about segmenting your audience and making sure you get the right message in the right way to the right people. And I think that's the same here. One size doesn't fit all, because clients are going to be in a very different situation. Sometimes they really don't want to know because actually they're dealing with a situation. Other times that call of help, it suddenly triggers a, gosh, I didn't know you could do that. I hadn't thought about you. Fantastic. Come and help us. And certainly, you know, we've had a mixture of all those sorts of things.
Quite unprecedented as well. We've said that enough times. Okay, so now we've got you back. Let's make the most of it. So, just your reflections on those two very different, you know, communicating as a business, and then that sort of observations on communicating with the media. Maybe you could just give us your thoughts on both of those, please, Sarah.
Yes, thank you. Well, certainly looking at the AECOM presentation, I was thinking that we've done very similar things ourselves, and actually then, you know, it is about being clear about who your audiences are, and I think a lot of it at the moment is, certainly from our perspective, we're kind of bringing in the psychology as well, because actually when you know your audiences, you know how you normally communicate with people, but actually these are very, very different times, and people are behaving differently, they have different needs, and so actually we're having to adjust almost day by day at the moment, and sort of do a lot of listening and understand how messaging is landing, whether it's with our supply chain and understanding what their requirements are, whether it's with, you know, we've still got a lot of people out there on the front line working really hard on critical infrastructure. You know, they've clearly had their own questions and concerns, and then we had this sort of mobilizing this huge remote workforce. So I think it's about adapting and listening for me, and just, you know, being human and recognizing that we're all people and we're all human beings. And I think, you know, looking at it from Andy's perspective, I think that's a really good reminder for all of us, because certainly thinking about the phases of this, you know, a few weeks ago we didn't even know we were going to be here, and overnight we were, I say we had the tiger by the tail for a while, really, where we were working on the basis of listening to the Prime Minister's briefing at 5 o'clock, you know, getting into a huddle with my exec team, working out what we needed to do, writing the comms, getting them out for the following day to our various audiences. And now we're moving into that steady state. You know, lots of people talked about that new normal. Now we're shifting a gear with all of our communications, and we're starting to think about how we hit the long haul, really, and how this is sustainable. And actually that's what's in my mind after Easter. We're shifting, and actually my attention will probably go back on the external. If I'm honest, our focus has been on our people and our clients and our supply chain, not the external media at this stage. But that's to come, and I think that's a good reminder from Andy for us.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting, and it's almost that kind of news cycle, isn't it? And you know, setting those priorities does kind of lead you to focusing kind of internally and with your clients for, you know, for the benefit of the business, which completely makes sense. Right, thank you very much, Sarah. So Andy, I've got a question in relation to PR. So you gave us a quite good overview of how to navigate the media, and we've got somebody asking, actually, how do you judge what's the, you know, how to pitch your story correctly? So specifically about how do you come across as being genuine and having an interesting story without appearing as opportunistic, recognizing actually we're in, you know, for a lot of people and for a lot of us are going to be really touched by such terrible things over the next few months. How do you understand that and kind of pitch it right? What's your advice of somebody who's perhaps heard all kinds of pitches over the last few years?
I think it's interesting that people often ask this question when it comes to trying to get media coverage at a difficult time. And I think, you know, the first thing is obviously you need to have a story, you know, something that's, that's actually interesting. So I'm not saying that this is necessarily something that Harriett would do, but let's just take an organization where the workers are actually doing something, you know, in relation to masks or whatever, or they're helping out in the local community. I think, you know, it's just to be open and honest with, you know, your original pitch to the, you know, to the journalist, and that pitch can take all sorts of different forms. I mean, sometimes it's email, sometimes, you know, the journalist just pick the phone up, or even if you don't, if you've got their contact details, then speak to them. But actually be open, as I say, open and honest. What I always think works well, particularly if you're dealing with the broadcast media, is to show some empathy, because everybody is, you know, as I said earlier, everybody's in the same boat. And I think if, when you're speaking to, you know, particularly a radio journalist, and especially if it's going out live, then, you know, you've actually got a bit of a free rein, really. But just, you know, in the same way that, you know, maybe when all of us come together as either colleagues or friends and we talk about the current situation, even if it's only for like, you know, 20 seconds, just talk about that and just say how, you know, difficult, you know, the situation is that we're all in. But then go on and talk about the particular issue, the story that you're actually trying to get across. But I think it's just to be human, really. And if you and if you are that, then I think, you know, people would actually, you know, respond to that. But don't worry about the fact that you're looking to get media coverage at a time of crisis, because, you know, frankly, the media needs information and the media needs stories. So you shouldn't feel uncomfortable about that at all. And provided you've actually got a good story, then I think the media would be interested in it. And the other interesting thing is, just make this one point, is particularly when you speak to the likes of the BBC, they often network things across the, you know, their whole, you know, sort of, you know, all of their different channels. So it's actually quite useful sometimes to actually, you know, be on the beeb, because they will, you know, it can be actually repeated elsewhere. But just be open and honest and show empathy. I think that, you know, that's the key thing. And most people in our industry, I think, are pretty good at that.
Okay, brilliant. No, that's very wise words there, and that sort of, don't be afraid to put forward something that is a good story. But maybe that's a very good point to end on, actually recognizing that we are all people, and perhaps this has made us feel a lot more human than we might have done before, and recognizing, like you say, that the people listening, people watching, people engaging with the media will be in exactly the same boat. So speak to them as people, rather than thinking they're a faceless, you know, a faceless conduit to get your message out. So that's brilliant. Right. I'm very sorry, we're going to have to draw this to a close. So we have got some questions we didn't get to, which we will come back to. We will try and give you written answers. But just to say thank you very, very much to all of my panelists. It's been really great having you. We will obviously put this online. You can follow up with us at ACE. You can follow up with the panelists. You can find them, you know, there's no escaping now in the world of digital communication, through LinkedIn, through social media. So please do, you know, pass your thanks on to them. Very, very grateful for you for joining us this afternoon. And just to say, if you want to play this back, if you want to share it, it will be on our website, along with all of these other webinars that you can see here. And we will be back next week with different panelists for series 2, and we'll be talking about bank loans. So I'm not going to make a comparison about how interesting that will be. But no, just to say thank you very much again for all of you, and take care. Be safe over the weekend. Thank you very much, all.
Thank you.
Thank you.